So I did a video in the back half of last year where I talked about some metal bands that I thought were overrated for one reason or another. Bands that I could still acknowledge and respect the artistic integrity of and the musicality of, or just them as musicians, but for one reason or another I just felt as if they either weren't my cup of tea or were a little overhyped in the general metal sphere eye. And that video ended up doing really well. You guys posted a lot of the bands that you thought were overrated, and I might eventually do a video going over the bands that you thought were overrated. I wanted to do a follow-up video because I could make quite a few parts of this. There are plenty of bands that I think for one reason or another get overrated, but I also think there are some underrated metal bands, so I might also do that eventually. But much like the first video, feel free to share the metal bands that you think are overrated for one reason or another, and give your opinions on the ones that are in this video. If you like any of these bands, that's perfectly fine. If you resonate with them, if you get something out of them, I think that's perfectly cool, and there is nothing like inherently evil or wrong about these bands. I do know that some of these takes, maybe all of these takes, aren't going to get me any friends, so without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with Avenged Sevenfold. Now, this is a band I am very familiar with because I grew up in the 2000s and the 2010s, and you could not escape the AMVs and the fucking edits and the Halo montages and the World of Warcraft Battleground videos with M. Shadow's voice roaring over the alternative metal instrumentation. And this kind of goes for their entire era, because I think every time that Avenged Sevenfold have ventured into new territory, I think that they are literally just doing something that other bands are able to do better. They commercialized Metallica's style even more when they went heavy metal. Their progressive metal era was melodramatic and overtly theatrical, and not in any good way. It was very unflattering. Their early metalcore days literally gets lambasted by just about any other metalcore band at the time. When it comes to that era of heavy metal revivalism and that wave of metal music in general in the late 90s and the 2000s, there are so many commercially viable bands that were doing more interesting things, breaking into the mainstream with some interesting ideas, pushing the envelope, making some creative music, and even when they try to be avant-garde, in air quotes, and experimental on their newest record from last year, they literally just sound like a fucking Mr. Bungle ripoff. So it seems like for me, no matter what Avenged Sevenfold do, they end up sounding corny, cheesy, and outplayed, and I think M. Shadows is a very frustrating and infuriating vocalist. I'm not gonna compare it to Imagine Dragons because I know that will get me literally crucified, but it's like that same grating tone and strained voice a lot of times that sounds like bro needs a fucking cup of water desperately. Personally, I just don't get anything out of their music, and there are some songs that I have a lot of nostalgia towards. I'm not going to say that that isn't the case, but I think overall Avenged Sevenfold as a band, as a product, just is so hit or miss and such a mixed bag for me that they had to land on this list. Another band that's been a very big roller coaster up and down ride that I have selectively really enjoyed some of the content from, but overall feel extremely neutral and meh about in a similar way to how I talked about Paradise Lost in my last video, Cult of Luna. I just feel like you could get what they do from Isis or Neurosis so much better. I think it goes for both sides of the spectrum, where you'll get bands that are extremely fast and heavy and intense, but they miss the mark on making memorable material, and you also get extremely slow, doomy, trudgy sludge metal bands that just play out their music and it feels like an endless ascent with no sort of payoff. And unfortunately, that's how I feel a lot with Cult of Luna. I think they take the most boring influences from post-metal, the most boring influences from doom metal, and the most basic material from sludge metal and distortion, noise, and feedback, and put it all together into this, like I said, endless staircase that just leads to nowhere. And when you have these songs that are so fucking lengthy, you want to feel something at the end of it, or at least something at some point. It's not even great in the sense of being atmospheric and emotionally, like, provoking, because there are dozens, hundreds of bands that are in the emotional, atmospheric vein that put more substance into their material than Cult of Luna do. The next one, and I think this might be the one that gets me the most hate, I'm just gonna say it, Nile. And I do think Nile as a band are incredibly important and influential. I'm not gonna say that. But Nile is one of those bands where If you've heard one of their records, you have heard all of their records. And it's not in the way of like a Cannibal Corpse where it's like, oh yeah, it's gonna kick ass, it's gonna do great. I think it also just comes down to not being able to evolve into the newer sphere. For example, if you take a band that usually doesn't change their style, like let's say Breaking Benjamin or Cannibal Corpse, they still fine tweak their style over time to feel more modern. They change their production, the way that they write some of their material, while not forsaking the thing that made them who they are. Nile, I think, have gotten very complacent over time, and I think their most recent output has just felt very blah and like they're just coasting at this point in their career. And this could be something that people really disagree with me for, but when it comes to like brutal death metal and tech death, I think they not only got outplayed by so many other bands that came after them, I think they got very complacent in their formula without doing anything to really bring it to the new sphere in an interesting way. And I think that shows in how they've fallen off a bit in terms of the engagement and retention and numbers that they used to do, because there was a time where Nile were one of the biggest death metal bands, period. They were selling out massive stadiums, they were having big numbers, and everyone knew who they were in sort of the extreme metal field. And yeah, they know them by name now, but in terms of musically, I just don't see people getting really pumped for new Nile material in the same way that they got whipped up for it in the past. Moving on from there, I just have to fucking say it. Can we fucking stop praising Baby Metal to the moon and back? Like, I get it, a lot of y'all started liking them after Kingslayer by Bring Me the Horizon, especially like the live performance video, but Baby Metal are just so mundane to me. And I think the reason why I feel that way is because I have always been very invested in the Visual Kei scene from Japan, as well as some of the great grindcore music and death metal music that comes out of Japan, but specifically the Visual Kei scene and experimental metal scenes in Japan. I think so many people praise Baby Metal as being the good export from Japan for metal, Japan's metal band, and obviously they might be the face of Japanese metal, but it's the most commercially viable and kawaii thing. And I'm not gonna say this is like a guarantee, but I do think that the fact that it's a bunch of little short kawaii cute Japanese women has sold a lot more than if it was the same music played by men or like Visual Kei performers. It frustrates me to see so many people claim that Baby Metal is the best that Japan has to offer, when if you compare their music to so many other fantastic grind bands, noise bands, as well as Visual Kei bands, you can hear that same commercial viability, but with the cultural significance of Japan. And I think the ethnic sort of instrumentation and cultural significance to a lot of the music from, say, Dir en Grey, and the specific nature of Japanese metal as a whole. Dir en Grey are fantastic. I adore them, especially Kyo is a fantastic vocalist. I think Baby Metal pretty much took all of like the generic things that you assume, or Americans and Western listeners assume of Japan, both aesthetically, musically, visually, just everything about them, and put it together in a way that is very digestible for a Western audience. And obviously they're very big in Japan too, but I think from a songwriting department, a lot of their music is very forgettable, and it's very clearly pandering to a specific demographic without really doing anything to push the genre in an interesting direction or use that platform to put Japanese metal even further on the map. And for the metalcore fans, y'all know I'm a metalcore boy. I love metalcore music, I love core music as a whole, but I have really grown a distaste for Wage War. Some of their early material slaps, some of their breakdowns and callouts really do slap. I'm not going to say that they're not brutal and extreme and that sort of thing, but they have really pandered to that octane core sound throughout the years and have progressively gone downhill. I would rather see them just go in like a full rock territory, hard rock territory like Asking Alexandria, than see them try to toe the line between this really hyper sanitized version of metalcore music being infused with like the octane core electric rock sort of vibe. I just think it's really played out, and I don't even think they're even close to the best that do it, especially considering they rip off from other bands and take styles from other bands so clearly. Like, there was a period of time where Wage War wanted so fucking bad to be Architects. It was so obvious, and I think their music throughout time has become more dime a dozen lyrically, more dime a dozen vocally, and has just gone downhill production-wise into this hollow, lifeless feeling. I personally just don't get nearly as much as I maybe once did out of Wage War, and I don't think there's gonna come a point where I'm super, like, stoked for a new Wage Wage War project, but I know a lot of people dig them, and a lot of people really sell them as one of the best metalcore and like hard rock bands, so I wanted to put them on this list. But that'll do it. What are your guys' opinions of these bands and some of the bands that you think are overrated? Let me know down in the comment section below. I can't wait to hear it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.